This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants.
The massive wildfires in California get political. We'll find out what the arguments are about, and we'll also get an eyewitness report from our correspondent who's on the scene right now. All of that on this episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and if you've been online at all in the last few days, you could not escape the dramatic pictures and video from the huge series of wildfires in the northwest of Los Angeles in California, whether it is those aerial photos of whole neighborhoods being destroyed, block after block after block, or whether it's celebrities like Paris Hilton posting pictures of their family homes being destroyed. Now, normally we don't really do natural disasters on this podcast. First of all, because quite often you need pictures to tell the story, and well, podcasts don't have pictures. And second of all, it sometimes feels like there's not much kind of policy stuff we can get our teeth into, because natural disasters are sort of just tragedies at the end of the day for sometimes large numbers of people, but is there politics, or is there something that we can understand about the world from them? Not always. But in this case, over the last few hours, some big political issues have emerged, not least the fact that Donald Trump is about to enter the White House in a couple of days' time, and he's got lots of views about this, and there's lots of implications about how water resources are managed in California. And then, of course, there's the big meta subject in all of these cases, climate change. So let's get a sit rep now from what's actually happening on the ground. We're joined by the BBC's Los Angeles correspondent, Emma Vardy. Hi, Emma.
Hiya.
Where are you right now?
Well, we're beneath the Pacific Palisades fire, which is still pretty much raging out of control up in the hills. We're close to Malibu down here, of course, a really affluent, iconic part of California, which now just feels like a ghost town, like lots of places do. Earlier on, we were up in Pacific Palisades where the fires moved away, but where you can just pick your way through the devastation. And honestly, I mean, words like apocalyptic are being used, Armageddon. Doesn't feel real. It feels like you're walking through a film set of a disaster movie. Just block after block of homes that are now shells and just bits of people's lives just lying there in the ash. It's an incredible sight, and I think it's only really just sinking in for people who live here.
And we're also joined by Camille von Kaenel, who is California environment reporter for Politico. Hello, Camille.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's interesting for me as an observer of this big news story in the UK that we've gone from kind of the initial crisis stuff and the very dramatic reporting that Emma's been doing to kind of much bigger political issues about, well, party politics and about preparedness and about resources. This is becoming as much a political story as it is a natural disaster.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we're staring at the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump is just a few weeks away, so things have turned political very fast. Yeah,
lots of stuff that we can discuss with you in a second, Camille. But just going back to you, Emma, how are people doing who've lost their homes? And I know that there's tens of thousands of people who've been evacuated from theirs.
I mean, I think people are in just complete shock, because lots of people have experienced wildfires before in the hills, but never before have they really seen it rage through such populated areas, and the scale of the destruction. I mean, it's being called the most expensive fire destruction in LA's history, because so many of these just millionaire, billionaire, areas have been totally and utterly destroyed. And people are just in grief, really, at seeing this. Even people who are not affected directly in their homes, they're just in grief at seeing how the face of LA has just changed so much, and areas that would have been a tourist attraction are now just a disaster zone. And you can just imagine how long it's going to take to put LA back together, and that's before we can start getting to the thorny questions of insurance and how all that kind of stuff works. But just looking around, parts are unrecognisable.
And was the issue here just that it was multiple fires over a very large area, so difficult to control anyway, or were there structural problems? Some people might even call them failings with the response to it.
It's having so many fires kicking off at once in all directions. That's what's made this so difficult, and then being so close to residential areas rather than one big wildfire, mostly up in brushland, that you get amazing aerial pictures of, which I've reported on before. this was multiple different locations. I mean, where I live in North Hollywood, just from my roof alone, I could see 2 or 3 of them, just from my roof. And so you just felt completely surrounded, and people didn't really know where to turn. I had friends evacuating in the Hollywood Hills from one house to another, and then the next house was, the fires were getting closer to that one as well. So it just started to feel like there was nowhere, almost nowhere started to become safe. And many people here with decades of experience of wildfires and all sorts of disasters saying to me they've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've been here a year and a half, and just, people are proud to live in LA. They love the fact that it's world famous. It's iconic. People wear the name Los Angeles on t-shirts all around the world. But this really puts a different face onto famous parts of this city.
And is anyone saying why these fires started?
It's a combination of there were these really perfect storm of these really strong winds. I've never felt winds this strong in LA since I've been here. Normally weather's pretty predictable. You do get these seasonal strong winds, but combined with a really dry few months. I mean, last year in January, there was quite a lot of rain. I was a bit disappointed to see that LA does get rain. I remember it being really wet, but actually there's just been nothing. I do a lot of hiking in these areas that get very dried out. They're really beautiful, but we've had great weather for months and months, not a speck of rain. But what that is doing, that's a building crisis, because the hillsides just become like kindling. One tiny spark combined with these hurricane winds are just an absolute perfect storm for disaster. And we saw it sparking off in all directions. Now, I don't want to start rumours and conspiracy. There is some questions over whether some of it could have been arson, and that's tied to the idea that looting has been happening. People wondering whether, with all the chaos kicking off, did somebody, spark something off in the Hollywood Hills, and they knew that with all these celebrity homes, it would be easy, in a populated area like Hollywood, to run up in the hills and do some looting. I don't want to sort of speculate on that, but that's the kind of questions people are asking, because people feel a bit suspicious. And until, this has all been kind of raked over in a bit more scientific detail, people are going to be asking these questions.
And Emma, I hate asking a really lame question like, what's the mood there? Because we can tell what the mood is going to be like. But what I want to get at is just, can you get a sense that people are pulling together in the face of a crisis? Or is there kind of fracturing? Is there blame? Is there anger? Is there finger pointing?
I think for ordinary people are being so kind. I mean, just us walking into shops, there were no masks you could buy in Home Depot the other day, and people started giving them out free to us because they could see we were working on the fire, and our masks were just covered in soot after hours in it. Of course, there's a lot of kindness, people coming up to each other asking if they're okay, and, yes, there is. I think there's less sympathy with, the celebrities, the Paris Hiltons of this world, naturally. But even so, even in the places that people could never even dream of affording to live, there's real grief from lots of people that these places have gone to the ground, because everybody liked to feel that they were living the dream of LA, the Californian dream, and now that's kind of really been spoiled, and it just changes the way everybody feels about this city.
And you mentioned masks. People might be able to hear it from listening to this, but you're wearing like one of those proper like medical grade masks. I imagine the air quality is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible. You taste it, you're breathing it. I was really in the thick of it yesterday, and you just had a headache coming out of it, and God knows what toxic stuff we breathed in. We tried to limit our time in it for all the crews involved, of course, but you couldn't have experienced or understood this without going into it in a safe as possible manner in the way that we did. But yeah, it gets very claustrophobic. I mean, I had a shower last night, washed all my clothes, hung stuff out, and I still smelt of smoke today, so I just put the same clothes back on again. I'll have to tell you that.
And Emma, I'll let you go, but just before you do, is there a sense that the firefighters have turned a bit of a corner, at least with some of these fires? Some of them are under control now. Well,
no, the largest ones at this moment are still not under control, but they are getting their best chance right now to try to get them. They have slowed the growth of some of the fires down, but that doesn't count as what they call containment here. When they say something is, the fire's contained, that's a more technical term. But slowing down the growth of them, yes, the Hollywood Hills one was definitely, that one got more under control last night. So hopefully, by the end of the day, or the end of LA's day, there might be better news. But then the winds are actually forecast to pick up again as we go into the evening. So, and of course, emergency services are just stretched so thin. They've been throwing everything at this. But, you're fighting in multiple locations with communications difficult, roads closed. They have already admitted that they hadn't had enough people on the ground to deal with this. I mean, how could they? It is so unprecedented, even with people coming in from other states. But right now there is this window which is giving them the best chance yet. So we'll see how it goes.
Emma, thank you very much, and please stay safe.
Thank you.
Right, Camille, lots to talk about because there's lots of issues being raised about the response to this. First of all, the mayor of Los Angeles, she was actually abroad in Ghana on an official trip while all this was happening, and she only just got back.
Right. She got back Wednesday morning, and she's already being attacked on this point, specifically for a political rival called Rick Caruso, who's this billionaire realtor who has businesses in the zone of evacuation, has been really hitting her hard, blaming her for being missing on the job, and specifically bringing up this issue of fire hydrants running out of water because of the water pressure issues. The fire hydrant system is just not designed to withstand a fire of this scale. So she's been sort of a rising political star. She's been kind of enjoying this extended political honeymoon, as my colleagues have reported, and that may be coming to an end.
And just on that issue of the fire hydrants and the availability of water, has something gone wrong with water resources in California, either at kind of like a sort of state level or just down to the level of the individual fire hydrants themselves?
Well, I guess it depends who you're talking to. Trump certainly, or President-elect Donald Trump certainly seized on the issue of water pretty immediately as these fires were raging out of control in Los Angeles. It's an issue that's very close to his heart. He's shown affinity with conservative-leaning Central Valley farmers who have long complained about not getting enough water delivered from the wetter northern part of the state. And so he immediately jumped on this issue to blame Newsom for having these rules in place that protect endangered fish in the wetter northern part of California and limit the amount of water that can be exported to the drier southern part of the state. Now, does that have a connection with the fires that are actually happening on the ground? Not really. Right now, Southern California is in a drought, as you know, your colleague reported earlier, but it's not lacking in imported water from Northern California. In fact, the reservoirs are at or above historic levels right now.
So it sounds like it's more a local firefighting issue in the scale of a kind of unprecedented fire rather than necessarily a kind of statewide neglect thing.
Yeah, and you've seen, you know, Governor Gavin Newsom was asked about this recently in a TV interview, and he immediately pivoted to saying, "Oh, this is a local issue. The fire hydrants are managed by the city. It's a local issue." Now, even wildfire experts, though, say that there's no fire hydrant system kind of in the world that would be able to meet the moment. But certainly it's a big problem. It's a big failure. You don't want to see firefighters unable to use their water hoses in the middle of a firefight. And so we're expecting, you know, there's already kind of conversations in the halls of the state legislature on, you know, are there any policy changes that need to happen to require more resilient fire hydrant systems?
Well, yeah, and you can go on social media and you can see videos of firefighters kind of having to stand around because they don't have the resources. Or I've just seen one of firefighters using quite small buckets to put out quite small patches of flames. And okay, that's completely out of context. I don't know anything about firefighting tactics, but if you wanted to paint a picture of kind of a failure by the authorities, those are quite kind of powerful images to make that case, aren't they?
Right. It goes to this idea that, or this point that these fires they're still out of control. The winds have been so bad that firefighters have just been focusing on saving lives. They've been able to do very little to contain the fire, protect homes and property.
Emma mentioned issues about insurance. Can we talk about what's going on with the kind of the insurance business in America and why that might have had an effect on how people are get compensation after this?
Sure. Yeah. So California insurance market has been teetering on the edge of collapse for a while now, as we've seen a series of these severe wildfires with really massive losses. And this could push it over the brink. I mean, we're still waiting to see final damage estimates, but we're looking at probably tens of billions of dollars, potentially the costliest disaster in California history. I mean, we still have to see, but there's been issues with private companies pulling out of fire-prone areas. This neighborhood in particular, Pacific Palisades, has seen like a major insurer drop a bunch of people last year. And so those people had to go to the state insurer of last resort, which is so bloated because it's been absorbing this shrinking private market that it may not have enough cash on hand to cover all of its losses. So it will still be able to pay out claims because it has other mechanisms to recoup costs, but those have broad implications across the state of California. The state insurer of last resort is likely to have to basically bill all the private insurers in the state for the costs of this fire, and that could trickle down to every single policyholder in California.
And then we've got the issue of climate change. And I know it's very difficult with individual events, whether they're fires, floods, storms, to attribute it to climate change. But as a reporter on the climate beat, what's a useful way of thinking about the climate change aspect here?
I think it's maybe most noticeable in the dry conditions that were in place in Southern California. Northern California has had a lot of rain lately. Where I am in Sacramento, we've had lots of rain. Southern California hasn't had that rain. Now, climate scientists have a whole process to attribute various weather events to broader greenhouse gas emissions rises in the atmosphere, and that will play out. But I think it's fair to see a link between climate change and the dry conditions in Southern California right now.
And the theory is that climate change will lead to more extreme weather, and this is proof of extreme weather happening. So it's kind of consistent with the trend that the scientists predict. Camille, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's the situation occupying people in the US. The situation occupying politicians at Westminster today is the increasing cost of British government debt, which has reached a new multi-decade high. This is how much interest the government has to pay on the money it borrows on the international markets to pay its bills. And at the same time, the value of the pound has gone down quite a lot against the dollar. So what does this mean? Why is it happening? And what political implications could there be? The person who can start to explain is BBC economics editor Faisal Islam, who's here. Hello, Faisal.
Hello.
And hello, Chris Mason at Westminster.
Hello.
Right. I suppose, Faisal, there's two things we can look at here. There's the currency, the pound, or there's the cost of government borrowing, which is known as the bond yield. What would you like to talk about first? Or do you want to put them both together?
Well, it is actually the fact that both are going in the wrong direction at the same time that is the key sort of red light. And I want to be precise about this.
Please do.
It's quite, in terms of the currency move, it is notable, but it's not massive. It went down this early this morning to like below 123 against the dollar. I mean, for context, it went down to 103 at one point during the mini budget, right? So, but it has come down at the same time that our effective borrowing costs have gone up. Normally, those things don't go together, and they indicate more than a raised eyebrow, but less than a crisis in terms of, okay, we're being watched now. We're kind of like on report. And it's interesting, we say the markets as if it's one thing. The markets is literally like it's like a sort of podcast of lots of different views, and they come down, and some people bet on one side and some people bet on the other, and the net movement in that is how the market moves, and that has been slowly and methodically over the past month to push up the effective rate of interest for government borrowing, and then latterly in the last week or so to push the pound down.
And just to be super nerdy, when we talk about the cost of government borrowing, what's the thing that you search for online to check what that is?
Yeah, so it's the gilt yield, and you can pick which time frame it is. It's like the length of a mortgage.
And gilt is the name for debt issued by the government.
Exactly. And so we're focused, the 10-year gilt yield is an effective loan to government that lasts a decade, and it's the standard benchmark for international comparison. But it is less relevant, for example, for the feed through into mortgage payments, which is more 2-year or 5-year. That's what explains that.
Well, yeah, we'll come on to that in a second. But basically, if you were to draw the graph then, so the spike we're in now is higher than when Liz Truss was Prime Minister doing the mini budgets.
Yes.
But it's been higher than that for a little while now.
Yes. And then, I think if we take it back a couple of months, there was a bump up, a few questions asked around the time of the budget. That then faded. And then it started a methodical move upwards that every day is probably not a news story, but when you sum it all up over a month, that is a move that is material. And much of that has happened at the same time in America.
Oh, so it is happening to other places.
It is. It hasn't happened so much in Europe, where they're more worried about slow growth, and therefore Europe's central bank is going to keep interest rates really low. So these things can flip really quickly, and there are a number of reasons, a number of countervailing reasons that go into a giant mixer and end up with what the bond yield is. But essentially, America moved up, and that's sort of setting the tone for volatility, which is not me saying that therefore there's nothing to see in the UK. You know, we could have perhaps been more immune to what was going on, to the volatility from the US. We're not. We're borrowing more money. Still questions about growth. Inflation's looking a bit sticky. And then there's some more profound questions that we can get onto.
Well, let's get onto them now. But I'll let Chris have a word on Edgeways first, though. Chris, is the reaction in Westminster like the reaction we had a few years ago when Liz Truss was doing the mini budget and bond yields were soaring to these levels?
Well, not quite. And the big political difference then, I mean, I think there's sort of two raised eyebrows here, just to add to the sort of mental facial expression.
Like a Roger Moore convention.
That Faisal was painting. So, look, what was happening a couple of years ago, the difference politically was that there was a big row within the Conservative Party about economic strategy. That was the race to be leader fought between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Liz Truss won. There was a lot of MPs who didn't think her strategy was a good one. And when they found evidence that suggested they were right all along, they got rid of her. So that's what explains why she didn't politically survive at that moment. She lost what limited trust and faith she had amongst her own MPs. That's always what does for political leaders, prompted often by external factors, but that is ultimately what does for them. So it's obviously very different politically right now. The challenge that the government has confronted by this, if it persists, is less a kind of question about what's caused it and are other countries in the same pickle or not. Because to an extent, I mean, that matters and it is interesting, but it doesn't change the reality, if it persists, of what the government has to consider in terms of what it does in response. And this morning, Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, got what's known as an urgent question in the House of Commons. So along came a Treasury Minister, not Rachel Reeves, but Darren Jones, the number 2 at the Treasury, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And effectively, he has a handful of options in a scenario like this, if it persists. One would be to change the self-imposed rules that they have around borrowing, that they set to try and ensure that they look like they are economically credible. Mr. Jones said that they are sacrosanct. You could put up taxes, or you could spend less than you were intending to spend. And every indication from Darren Jones, he picked his words rather carefully, but he talked about the government having to live within its means and departments have to live within their means. He faced questions from Conservative MPs who used the word austerity and put it to him, which is quite a sort of about turn in terms of political conversation and questioning after the last 10, 15 years. And he kept falling back on that formula, that they don't want to put up taxes, they don't want to change their rules, and that therefore points in one direction if, and we keep saying if because it's worth saying if, this continues to be the picture as we count down to the date in March, in the middle of March, or tail end of March, when the Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent watchdog, churns out its latest update on its projections for the economy. And then the spending review, where government departments are all looking at what they spend, concludes a few months later in June.
And we can hear how that played out in the House of Commons in this clip from the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, asking a question to Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
Far from this government laying the foundations for a stronger economy, the Chancellor is squandering the endeavours of millions of hard-working people up and down our country who are now having to pay the price for yet another socialist government taxing and spending their way into trouble. Does the right honourable gentleman not now accept that it is time to change course?
He talked about the debt burden this country has. Maybe we should just reflect a little as to why we have so much debt. It's because pre-pandemic, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the burden of debt inherited by this government from the party opposite from 2010 onwards, why did the last government have to borrow so much money every single month, not just to invest, but to pay the day-to-day bills? Because of an absolute failure to get growth into the economy. They could not make the numbers add up. They've stacked up the country's credit card. They've left it to this party to deal with, and we are going to deal with it.
And Faisal, of course, the reason we're talking about what this means for spending and tax rises is because if the government is having to spend more on debt interest, there is, by definition, less to spend on defence, the NHS, hospitals, anything else, public sector pay.
If she's going to meet her self-imposed rules, which is only to borrow to invest. So it's a combination of hitting that self-imposed rule. What we've had clarified is a little bit techie, but quite important, which is what they've said is the Office of Budget Responsibility, which has a legal obligation to put in another forecast. They weren't planning to have another budget around this in March, but they're saying if that forecast, because of this change in the cost of servicing the debt, is now off target, they will correct that. And every indication, as Chris was saying, is that will be done via spending, a further spending squeeze. That's probably not as dramatic as it might be because it's happening against the context of a spending review. They can't do what they used to do, which is they'd always just kind of cut a road project or a rail project, because this has got to be done on current spending. This is about current spending. It's not about those long-term capital. So it leaves you with welfare, some sort of departmental thing, some sort of efficiency savings. So that is, and the quantum, whilst 10 billion is a lot of money.
Quantum, which is the posh word for
yes,
amount.
Sorry, which is 10 billion. Yeah,
You've just been having
I've been stuck in the market,
obviously.
exactly. Is it over 5 years? You know, you can do it, and then just to add to what Chris said about the parallels or not with 2022. You know, whatever it is that they need to do, what they're telling us today is that they're going to do it. And they have a majority of 172 do it. And it might be politically painful, and they're still going to do it. Here's the bigger problem, though. Like, I do wonder if you just put all of this in a mixer and stand back a second, is whether the market's eyebrow may not be about a specific policy, but what matters in the markets is, like, is it a credible set of policies? Is your strategy on target? And, you know, all of this, you know, the idea that you essentially borrow money to invest in the future of the economy, and it's a green, decarbonised economy, and then everything will be cheaper for everybody and we'll all grow faster. That's the basically Bidenomics without so much money. Now we have Bidenomics without the money and without Biden, because this is not a strategy being followed by the world's number one economy. In fact, it's being railed against by the world's number one economy, which definitely sets a different vibe in the markets. And so whilst it might be right or it might be wrong, that's not my judgment, the markets are saying, well, if you want to do this, we're going to charge you the going rate for lending. We're not going to assume this is going to generate the growth to pay for itself.
Okay, so, I mean, it's impossible to say what the market wants because, as you said, it's lots of different participants acting on different but similar incentives. I mean, what kind of economic policy are they sort of demanding from the UK government then?
I think they want a credible growth plan that is going to work. They want to be convinced. They probably want to see some conviction. And this is where it's really interesting. Maybe some of the background noise that we're hearing, whether it be from the world's richest man or whether it's just sort of general shakiness that you wouldn't have expected with a government newly elected with a majority of 170 and the power to do whatever it wants, even the vibe that comes from it, at the margin, maybe having an impact. Are they convincing? Can they stare down this small hedge fund that is starting to short Britain, essentially, bet against Britain? Can they stare them down and say, you're going to lose your shirt? Are they in sort of defence mode? So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting and narrative-based, and discuss the demeanour of the government and their just general, what they look like and how they feel. Are they convincing right now? Have they got a convincing growth strategy? You know, and you could look at it the other way. I mean, are they, if they believe in the, say, green growth strategy, have they gone for it? Do they, you know, are they going to lead? Are we going to see windmills everywhere? Are they going to take on the blockers that they talk about in terms of planning? Are they actually going to do that? So they've got to sort of have a plan. And they thought stability, this is key, I think, they thought stability was going to achieve that.
And I remember Keir Starmer saying stability is change, and me sort of slightly taking the mickey of him at the time, because that's a bit of a weird slogan, but at the time it did sort of
I don't think that. I don't think that's enough. You need to actually, if you've got a plan that's off kilter and maybe not consensus, you've got to convince. Will they so they are raising some quite fundamental questions, even if it fades away.
And Chris, in addition to her own fiscal rules, Rachel Reeves has kind of made two rods for her own back, a process one and a promise one. The process one being, she said, gone are the days of having sort of two budgets a year, or an autumn statement and a budget, both of which are huge. She said, the next time you hear from me will be when I carry a red box and do loads of all the changes will be next autumn, not in the spring. And also she did that Q&A at the Confederation of British Industry conference a few weeks ago, where she said, no more tax rises. I've done the big budget that I needed to do for this Parliament.
Yeah, and both of those then point in the same direction as the language that we were hearing from her deputy Darren Jones in the House of Commons, that you go for spending instead, not least because, firstly, yes, that promise about tax, but secondly, you have a mechanism. There isn't another budget until the autumn. Of course, governments can change their mind on that sort of stuff, but if you want to look like you're in control and you're credible and all the rest of it, doing something sort of that attaches the word emergency to it might not be unduly wise. But you also have a mechanism that they're going through at the moment, the spending review, that is looking at what you spend and where you spend it. And part of that is what they call this zero-based review. In other words, this argument that says that Labour haven't been in power for yonks, and therefore there must be all sorts of bits and bobs of spending and projects and whatnot that have been committed to over the last decade and a half, maybe not all of which are worth continuing with or as efficient as they should be, or are spending taxpayers' money as well as they might. And so they're going through this process against what I'm told, speaking to senior figures, is quite a tight deadline, June, given the scale of it, to try and see where they can save money. But it's entirely possible that they don't manage to save what they need merely by getting rid of things that people barely notice, because it was almost one of the golden rules of public spending, is that someone somewhere will notice. It will feel like a cut to something somewhere, even if there is a broader view that it is a justified and necessary sort of trimming, particularly in the circumstances, or even for its own sake.
And Chris, in the very short term, Rachel Reeves is supposed to be getting on a plane to China very soon. Is she still going? Because lots of her critics are saying she should stay. She is going to China. She's setting off to spend a weekend in China. And yeah, we've seen opposition parties saying that she should stay. She didn't turn up to answer the question this morning in the House of Commons. She is still in the UK as we record on Thursday afternoon. I think two things going on there. One is opposition parties making the argument that says, the real focus should be here. I think, again, there would be a counter that if she suddenly didn't go on a trip that's been in the diary for ages and ages and ages, that would also give off a certain reek of panic, potentially. Secondly, there is a political argument over and above the conversation we're having about the markets today. There is a bigger political argument about what is the right posture towards China. And, we've talked about it before on Newscast, haven't we? Everything from David Cameron and the pint in the pub with President Xi of the best part of a decade ago, to a much more sort of hawkish, cautious view about China in more recent years, and a slight softening of position more recently. And of course, the big economic story, this is Faisal's territory, not mine, but the big economic story of this century is the rise of China, and the argument that you'll hear from some in government is a sort of warmer engagement with Beijing and others in the East is part of that strategy around growth. But yeah, long answer to say, yes, she's still going. There's two arguments, one about should she be here because of all the market stuff, and then the second one about that bigger strategic thing around the UK's engagement with China. And Chris, last question for you. Is it true that Liz Truss is threatening to sue Keir Starmer?
Yes, it is true. It is true. So she has sent or lawyers have sent what's known as a cease and desist letter to the Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street. It's basically a shut up letter. It's where lawyers write to someone and say, look, we've noticed you've been saying things which we believe to be defamatory, to be libelous, therefore to be, in theory, something challengeable in court because you can't prove the veracity of your claim, and therefore shut up or we'll sue you. That's the basic thrust of it. The context, you get libel kind of writs flying around all the time, but they don't tend to happen very often in politics because it's kind of accepted that it's the rough and tumble of political debate, unless it seemed to be utterly egregious. Anyway, this letter has gone in. I noticed a video on Liz Truss's socials as well, offering a commentary on the state of the economy.
All my letters to my lawyers with a social media video.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
Buying a new flat, publish a video.
Yes, but Downing Street, I think I'm right in saying, I think I saw a note from them earlier, it said something effectively amounting to the Prime Minister will carry on saying what he's always been saying.
Faisal, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Chris, thanks to you too.
Cheers.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thanks to everyone who's been on it, and thanks to you too for listening. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye.